Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. College football season is complete, and everybody at the home office turns all of their attention to the NFL playoffs, and we'll get things started with Wild Card Weekend. The 49ers and Rams sitting at home taking it all in, while 12 teams will look to punch their ticket into the second weekend. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, given all of the coaching firings, retirements, and everything else, it's good to see a legend like yourself still showed up to work this fine Thursday morning.
Why are you an asshole?
Because that's what I do. If I'm not an asshole, you get confused and think I don't love you anymore.
That's it. Gotta tell you. Love that kind of love. What's cooking? A lot of carnage
not
going
much,
on
my
this
friend.
morning.
Been interesting to watch this coaching carousel go. Black Monday, a little bit uneventful. We get all the fireworks with Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick. But the nice part is we have meaningful football and some opportunities to be exploited in the betting market. I know that when we look at this playoff format...
Is.
Well, I mean, theoretically, I'm not quite sure I've found them yet. That's where I'm hoping you come in as a portion of this program. But yeah, it's been interesting to watch the market go. I mean, I know we're going to get in all of these games, talk about weather impacts, where the market's open, where they're going, where they've trended. It's been fascinating to see people rallying around what feels very similar sides and totals, at least early on in the week, as we record here on a Thursday morning.
Rallying around similar sides and totals. I hang out in a silo, so I have no idea what you're talking about. But
tough to watch the market and see a total move 7 points, huh?
Unless you... Well, we'll get there. All right, the one specific one you're talking about, though, that everyone seems to be on from our silo, I have not joined that party.
No, that makes two of us that are not on the party. Just did want to get your take real quick on the coaching stuff. People always value your opinion. Anything?
Nothing.
Got
nothing.
All right.
I have nothing.
Easy enough. It's shortest discussion and topic we've ever had.
The Belichick thing has been
rumored
known for a while. Where does he end up? We'll see. Harbaugh, where does he end up? We'll see. But I think he does make that leap. Good for Brad, getting our listeners to the window there with Michigan's team total over 30.5.
Made him work a little bit. It's the Michigan defense setting up the old short field touchdown.
Boy, that team a fraud too. I mean, that was the part that was so difficult in handicapping some of these games down the stretches. All these teams are just so down.
I have to ask a question, and I know it may be salt in the wound and it's fresh, and this is a college football podcast.
I was gonna. So I know where you're going to go, but just to
you can cut me off at the pass if you want.
Just to paint a picture of what Michigan is, I didn't want to be that guy, because as I'm watching this, I know very early on, like when it's not even like widely available, there was some random number grabs like Michigan moneyline minus 160 that I owned a part of in some accounts that a couple of groups bet. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, boy, this thing's going to be easy the way it started. Then all of a sudden, we're in like the middle of the third quarter. I'm like, man, this thing's going to go down in flames. And I think, yes, Michigan's defense was largely responsible for Washington's offense playing their C- game, their D+ game. But no one felt comfortable with any type of Michigan ticket late into that third quarter, early fourth quarter. And so that final score, despite what people want you to believe. And so since I started doing this, Michigan's one of the worst national champions, and I wanted to get Brad's opinion, and maybe he'll tweet this out, but since he started doing his own power ratings in 2015, he texted me, Michigan is 4.5 points worse than any other national title champion. So not a great year, which is, good for us. We kind of called that all the good teams were down. So yes, where you were going with that was I certainly would have loved to have seen a healthy Florida State and Jordan Travis against those dumpster fires.
That was the long-winded approach to try and get there, but you eventually arrived at the finish line that I was trying to lead you to.
Yes. Okay. Let's
all right, you want to talk a little NFL?
Yes.
All right. Browns and Texans, the first game to kick things off on Saturday. It feels like this is the Houston Texans invitational time slot, that if the Texans are playing on Wild Card Weekend, they are always early Saturday afternoon, 4:30 Eastern. And they'll welcome in the Cleveland Browns for the second time in just a few short weeks. The Browns, a 2.5-point road favorite, total in this game of 44.5. We've seen the Browns take a little bit of money, Payne, and we've also seen the over take money in this contest as well. When we look at this game, clearly the storyline that won't be present, the Deshaun Watson Bowl. Plenty of illustrations of exactly how the Houston Texans were able to build this roster without Deshaun Watson. You go through the laundry list of players that they were able to acquire through the draft. It is immense, to say the least, and there is no doubt DeMeco Ryans has this organization headed in the right direction sooner than a lot of us anticipated, with a franchise quarterback in C.J. Stroud. The Browns will become the first team since the 1970 merger to play a playoff game without their Week 1 starting quarterback, starting running back, left tackle, and right tackle. No Watson, Chubb, Conklin, and Jedrick Willis. Credit to Kevin Stefanski for all that he's been able to accomplish. 27% of the Browns' salary cap is on IR. It's the highest amongst playoff teams, and you see the way that they've had to go about adjusting their playing style. The Browns did win here 36-22 back in Week 16, but we know C.J. Stroud didn't play. Amari Cooper, that was the last time we saw him out there on the field for the Browns, and he went absolutely nuclear with 265 receiving yards. Meanwhile, the Houston Texans are trying to make a bit of history in their own right. They can be the first team since the 1981 New York Giants to win a playoff game when they came into the season with odds of 200-1 or greater to win the Lombardi Trophy. It's the largest win improvement in the NFL from last season, plus 7 games. The Texans, the fewest turnovers in the league this year at 14. Meanwhile, Cleveland on the other side committed the most turnovers and most by a playoff team since the 2004 Rams. This is road Joe Flacco, Payne. We've seen it before, but he hasn't been in that spot all that often over the last decade or so. When you look at the game here, I mean, there's so many different ways to take it, whether it's the Browns offense that looks different under Flacco's leadership against the Texans defense, it's a little bit banged up, or C.J. Stroud, the strength of this Texans group against the Browns defense that's left a little bit to be desired on the road. There are some noise in those numbers. I'll give you the opportunity to take which side of the ball fascinates you the most when you look at handicapping this contest.
When you say road Joe Flacco, is there some type of narrative or splits involved there? Or was
this is what
him being
Joe,
on the
this
road?
is what Joe Flacco does in his playoff starts.
Gotcha.
He's covered 7 straight, tied for the longest streak by a quarterback in the past 25 seasons. Over there, 11-4 against the number in his career as a starter in the playoffs, second best over the last 25 seasons with a minimum of 10 starts.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's start there because that I think is the fun part of this matchup, right? When you hire. When Houston goes out and hires its head coach, it's a defensive guy in DeMeco Ryans, so he's going to get another crack at Joe Flacco and Kevin Stefanski for the second time inside of 3 weeks, and you do wonder a little bit if it provides a second mover advantage, so to speak. The Browns' offense was wildly explosive in the first meeting, but the non-garbage time success rate just 39%, slightly below Cleveland's season-long average, and they finished 27th in that department on the year. So more explosive than down-to-down success. You'd hope, having seen it recently, there aren't as many surprises formationally with motion and play-action rates, and that helps prevent many of the coverage busts we saw for the Texans. Now, we fully should get the aggressive game plan for Kevin Stefanski through the air, and that's probably why Stefanski should win Coach of the Year, just because he's been so adaptable. And I think we've talked about this a couple times the back half of the season, where you mentioned the tackles, 2 elite tackles being out, Nick Chubb down, which really led this efficient run attack. Now all 3 are out. You have a mobile quarterback in Deshaun Watson to the polar opposite in Joe Flacco, and it's just Stefanski's made it all work on the fly. So where I'm going with this is the Browns are 27th in schedule adjusted rushing efficiency. The Texans defense, number 2 stopping the run, 6th in EPA per rush allowed, 2nd in rushing success rate allowed. So sure, there are going to be some zone runs for Cleveland to help the play action game, but this will very much be about Joe Flacco attacking a weak Texan secondary that, to me, when you look, yes, they've been a little bit better, but I look at this unit and they haven't really played anybody either. You think about facing good offenses, it just hasn't been the case. One passing offense ranked better than 13th all season. The Houston Texans have faced came all the way back in week 1 against the Ravens in their new look offense. So the secondary has some issues. We know Ward's still out. A couple of those guys are nicked up back there. It's probably just going to be a 2-man game again. So I think that's really where, D'Amico Ryans comes into play here. Like Amari Cooper has certainly been resting for 19 days. He's going to feel good. Texans struggle to cover outside receivers. David Njoku is a matchup nightmare. It's awesome seeing Flacco realize that, right? A savvy veteran would. Njoku's finished the season top 3 in target rate per route run, and I think because of the pieces Houston has defensively at linebacker and safety, I mentioned with Ward out, teams kind of pick on the Texans with their tight end, so bottom 3 in receptions allowed to that position. I just think Cleveland's attack plan is pretty straightforward, right? It's just a matter of D'Amico Ryans making the adjustments and having the chess pieces. The latter I'm not sure of. Will Anderson played 12 snaps in week 17. Tried to gut it out, played 31 against the Colts, and he was pretty hampered and ineffective. Jonathan Grenard's supposed to be back this week. Can't envision him being 100%. So I think Cleveland finds success here. And it's not just, the Flacco stats you mentioned on the road, but just being in a clean environment. They're probably not going to be overwhelmed by the situation. They've been in this building just a couple weeks ago. You're getting clean air, right? You're getting the fast surface. You're getting the dome environment, something that just has not been the case for this Cleveland's offense, no matter who's operating it the last handful of years here. But what's interesting to me here, Todd, a little bit more is like not matchup related, but, the most important factor, price. If you think back to week 16, Cleveland visits Houston. We almost gave out the Browns as our best bet. We should have because we got screwed on the Vikings there.
Good old Lions tank job.
Yeah.
The Vikings and Nick Mullins.
Yeah. It was second on our list. I know we ended up playing it personally, but where I'm going with this is we laid minus 140 on the money line. And like right now, the consensus price is very much the same. The difference is back in week 16, it was Case Keenum starting and Davis Mills in relief, and now you're forced to lay a heftier price on Cleveland, but it's C.J. Stroud under center. So that's very much why when this got to 3, forget all of the matchups, forget some of the injuries, the price just became too much of a bear when you think about that adjustment in just a short period of time.
D'Amico Ryans also calling out his team on the defensive side for the way they didn't tackle and swarm last week. You mentioned how prolific that run defense has been. Uncharacteristic performance in the biggest game of the season against the Colts. Almost cost them on the road for the division crown on Saturday night, but they were able to come up with a timely stop, or I should say an incomplete pass from Gardner Minshew and a drop from Tyler Goodson that got them across the finish line. So we'll see exactly what Cleveland...
Twice in a row.
A couple of runs out of bounds and people clamoring for a player that looked like he was operating at about 60% to be out there to run an angle route on a pivotal 4th down. But that's a different discussion for a different day because we know social media knows best. And you know what? They should have run up to the line, Payne forced to play on 4th down rather than calling a timeout, running their best stuff to a player they thought was healthy, thinking that an incompletion was in the cards. When we look at the other side, C.J. Stroud, a rookie that's exceeded everyone's expectations. All signs point to him being Offensive Player of the Year, even despite the numbers that Puka Nacua put up as a 5th-round pick for the Los Angeles Rams. More on him a little bit later in the show. Against the Browns defense that, look, you go through the numbers. I know the home road splits aren't exactly a positive in that regard. We talked a little bit about how turnovers have impacted that. From a line play standpoint, this is a group that's been great against the pass, great against the run, allowing 4.5 yards per carry to running backs. Not a great mark in that regard, but Jim Schwartz employing a man-to-man defense and a lot of cover 1 one, when you look at the way C.J. Stroud has struggled against those concepts, what kind of expectations can we realistically have for a rookie, knowing he's not going to have all of his weapons at his full disposal, despite those gaudy numbers that Nico Collins was able to put up last week against the Colts secondary?
I thought Stroud played well early last week. He opened that game with the bomb to Nico, and that certainly helps confidence in what is, to me, a playoff-like game on the road. Positive 0.83 EPA per dropback and a 64% success rate in the first half against the Colts. And then Gus Bradley made some adjustments, and the Texans' offense dipped from basically elite to, above average good, somewhere in there. I think there's so many interesting things on this side of the ball, and a lot of the success the Texans have had since the middle part of the season is somewhat schedule aided. You look at C.J. Stroud since week 9, the Texans' offense has faced Arizona, dead last in pass defense over that stretch. Cincinnati, 30th. The Titans twice, they're bottom 5. Tampa, who was dealing with a bunch of secondary injuries at the time of that matchup. Jacksonville dealing with some secondary injuries and just completely bottomed out and downtrended towards the back half of the season. There has been 3 defenses over that stretch that have strong pass defenses. It's Cleveland and the Jets. They're ranked number 1 and number 2 defending the pass. Texans lost both those games. The Denver secondary trended well the back half of the season, were a final drive away from beating Houston in NRG Stadium. There's also massive shifts, so I'm kind of getting back to your point here at the top. C.J. Stroud played primarily a zone defense last week against Gus Bradley and the Colts. Quite literally, C.J. Stroud's favorite type of zone to feast against was cover 3. I did hear that made its rounds last week, specifically on Fridays. I'm not sure if you heard that or not.
I'd heard rumblings from some trusted sources that were there that somehow our information became very public on slightly larger platforms. I don't know where that information would have come from.
I'm going to need a nap because of that source. I'm supposed to be doing drinks with him this evening.
Well, you better rest up, but kudos to you, because I heard that you declined an invitation on a school night to deliver your best performance to date, knowing these playoff games are very high leverage situations.
There was other people there. That was not going to be my...
You prefer to play man coverage? You prefer to play man coverage?
It felt like he was with employees. Like, I'm not going to... Yeah. Now, having played this out in my head on 3 hours of sleep preparing for this podcast, and it being a potentially late evening, I may need a nap, or I'm going to fall asleep by about 9.
Yeah, a couple pieces of dark chocolate will get you across the finish line.
Okay, so back to like last week where Stroud got everything perfect in terms of the type of defense, and the splits have been pretty massive. C.J. Stroud substantially worse against man. Bottom 5 in the NFL in terms of EPA per dropback. Top 3 in EPA per dropback against zone. You look even the back half of the season since week 9, dead last. It is the largest delta for any qualifying quarterback in the league. And the problem for C.J. Stroud and the Texans is the Browns play the highest rate of man coverage. So you went from the number 2 most zone-heavy team with the Colts to the number 1 most man-heavy team in the Browns, within a week. The other delta here for C.J. Stroud is massive when pressured versus being kept clean. 77 quarterbacks this season have been under center, whether it was for 1 snap or, 600 snaps, whatever it is. C.J. Stroud is graded out 43rd when pressured. So you kind of wrap this all up in a ball, and you have C.J. Stroud, a QB that thrives against zone and being kept clean, and last week had that perfect matchup, right? He faced, the second heaviest zone team again, faced, a pass rush that was 26th in win rate. Now you have a guy who, struggles against man, struggles against pressure, facing the number 1 man team and the second best team in pass rush win rate. So it's just this massive change from week to week. And so I think what's interesting about this is like, you go back to that first matchup again, and I'm playing this out in my head, and I went back and listened to how we broke down that Week 16 game. We discussed one other thing that's now making its rounds: the Browns' defensive splits, home and away. And on the surface, the dichotomy is huge. but it had serious noise because the down-to-down stuff for the Browns was still elite on the road. They were just giving up explosives. That was the difference. So I don't see the Texans having a ton of down-to-down success in this spot, but if Stroud and the Texans can hit some explosives, maybe have a few game-changing plays to produce offense, maybe they can pull this thing out, right? That would be the path, is being able to hit that explosive. Now, you lose a lot of that explosiveness when Tank Dell went down against Jacksonville. Certainly Nico got loose on the opening play of the game, and somehow Gus Bradley didn't make someone else beat him. But we did see in this first matchup, Denzel Ward did return, and Nico Collins wasn't much of a factor. Noah Brown dealing with a pretty severe back injury. Boy, that would be tough when you kind of starting to hear what the actual injury is. Robert Woods tried to give it a go last week. I would assume he is out there this week. But there's just not a lot of downfield threats aside from Nico, and I wouldn't necessarily call him a burner either, but you got to figure out how to hit some explosives because the Browns are susceptible to that.
That's the whole thing. I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, the Texans also, they've been prone to giving up the big play as well. It's a question of who can hit those home run balls and be able to pick up chunk yardage, since moving the ball down to down could be a challenge for both of these sides on a somewhat regular basis. Final thing on this game, Payne, when we look at it, we've gone through the key on the total, past the 44 out to 44.5. We've seen a little bit of resistance come in. I know there were a couple of rogue threes where you had to lay a price. Those got cleared out of the market pretty quick. Suffice to say, we think this is where we settle for this game at 2.5 and 44.5 leading up to Saturday kickoff?
Ooh, it's a good question. One thing we probably should have talked about at the top, and I think if you are waking up next week and the games are ending, I would just log into your sports book of choice and start to chart some of the numbers. One thing that's very evident if you do this in real life and you're kind of waiting for your Don Best or your other potential platforms that provide these odds to you, they opened extremely late because they were waiting on days and times and rotation numbers. Well, the actual numbers had been open for hours, and so just Pinnacle, you look like this total was, you could have got 42.5, and so that won't show that on the actual screen as the opener, but that's what it was, and got buried pretty good. And then we had another group come in at 43.5 and pushed it out to 44.5.
They get as high as 45, I think,
it
too, before
did.
you started to see the resistance point.
I don't know where we go from here on this total. These are all standalone games, so the public is going to have their say. Okay? I don't necessarily know where the Texans offense comes from unless they're hitting explosives, right? Singletary potentially hitting some explosive run or two. That's kind of the fear here for me offensively from that side. And then obviously, the Browns offense isn't perfect. They still turn the ball over. They're probably not going to have a complimentary ground game. And so they too are operating on explosives. But suddenly you get these teams in a dome environment and both are pushing the ball. And I think, Houston was super conservative last week and that made its rounds. And so Bobby Slowick probably should be smartly putting this game in the hands of CJ Stroud a little bit more, even though the matchup doesn't necessarily depict that that's the best option. You got to go down with your best players in these types of games. So
yeah, you want players.
I don't know where the total goes from here. Right, we've already kind of made that massive push through the key, so it would take a difference of opinion. Right, it would be a battle if this was to get sent lower and not necessarily like in your mind you're like, oh, the game day move or oh the Friday move with increased limits. That's the true side. No, it'd just be a differing opinion.
Should be interesting to watch. There's no doubt about it.
At 3, it's exactly what we talked about at the very top. Right? The only people taking 3 in this game are the people that's saying, hey, this is the same exact line without CJ Stroud in week 16. How can that be?
Right, with a significant upgrade at the quarterback position, which, as we know, is the most valuable in the National Football League, especially with a guy that's got a long runway in front of him in C.J. Stroud. Should be a fun way to kick things off Saturday afternoon. Into the nightcap at Arrowhead, where Mother Nature will have her say in exactly how a team hailing from South Florida fares in the elements. It's the Kansas City Chiefs, a 4.5-point favorite as they'll welcome in the Miami Dolphins. Total on this game, 44.5. Shop around depending on which side of the ledger you may find yourself on in this game. We have seen the side get bet up, opened as low as 3 in a lot of prominent shops through the secondary key, now sitting at 4.5. When we look at this Kansas City Chiefs team, they will welcome in former member of that organization, Tyreek Hill, and a couple of key Chiefs that were a byproduct of that deal. Trent McDuffie, Rashee Rice, Sky Moore could have an impact in terms of Kansas City's playoff prospects as well. When we look at the weather impact, the Dolphins as a franchise have lost 10 straight games with a kickoff temperature below 40 degrees, the longest active streak in the NFL. However, the last 2 games played in these kind of elements, they lost in Buffalo, and they were both by narrow margins, so keep that in mind if you're looking to try and use that as justification for laying the worst of the numbers we currently sit. Forecast for the game looks to be single digits, winds 10 to 15 miles an hour, and a small chance of wet stuff coming down in that spot as well. The Chiefs will have an opportunity to join the 2011 to 2018 Patriots, who had 8 wins, and the 1991 and 96 Cowboys with 6, as the only teams to win a playoff game in 6 straight seasons. Mahomes can join Tom Brady as the only quarterback with 10-plus playoff wins at one stadium. Mahomes accomplishing at Arrowhead. Of course, Brady doing that at Foxborough. Teams did play earlier this season in Germany. Tua produced a season-low 5.7 yards per attempt in that contest. Mahomes was very workmanlike with a sub-200-yard effort, multiple completions to 8 different receivers, and that was Kansas City building an early 14-0 lead, getting a defensive touchdown and holding on in the second half as the Dolphins made adjustments down the stretch. Payne, this is a Dolphins team familiar with playoff futility. They're seeking their first playoff win since 2000 versus the Indianapolis Colts. We know the Dolphins were outscored by playoff teams so far this season, bringing in a mark of minus 91, which is the second worst by a playoff team in NFL history, rivaling the 1994 Bears. I can say all that, but the reality of it is this Dolphins team is currently constructed now, looks a hell of a lot different than the teams we saw early in the year, just dealing with a rash of injuries. I don't even know how to go about trying to quantify some of the defensive impact for a unit that we thought was trending up, had a chance to be a top 3 defense. Significantly taller task when you lose everybody at the pass rushing position that can generate buzz. The linebacker core is depleted, and some of that, of course, driving this number higher.
Yeah, if you remove quarterbacks, the Dolphins far and away have lost the most wins above replacement due to injury. And so, I think they're probably going to need their offense here. Probably the best place to start for this game. The Dolphins are at least getting pieces back on offense. And they started to last week. You got your right guard, Robert Hunt. He returned for the Buffalo game, played extremely well. And he has really just been, as a player, trending up the last couple seasons. So it's nice to get him back into the mix. I fully expect Waddle and Mostert to go. And this is another game with some weather. Supposed to be 5 below with a minus 15 wind chill by about 9 p.m. Wind much tamer than expected, but gusts are still going to reach into the mid-20s. And so based on the weather, based upon the matchup, how that Germany game ended, which you mentioned, I think Mike McDaniel's going to fire up the ground game as long as the state of it allows it. The weakness of the Chiefs defense is still against the run. They're dead last in the NFL in run stop win rate. And that's kind of what you would expect when you have 3 of the league's, I would call them a compilation, 3 of the league's worst interior run defenders. And then you throw Chris Jones in there, who's more of a pass rusher from the inside than he is a run stopper, although he seems to this time of year focus a little bit more on the run. But you look, it's translated to a defense that's 28th in EPA per rush allowed, 27th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. So I think the idea here is, you have Mike McDaniel, who's brought up in a run-first type of scheme under Kyle Shanahan, and you can use some of that efficiency you found in the first matchup and potentially try and shorten this game to help some of those aforementioned injuries on the defensive side. That's the path you're going to go, and Miami's 8th their offensive line, a run block win rate, and they've been down key cogs throughout the course of the season. I mean, they have not had their starting 5 for very many snaps, one of the lowest rates in the entire league. They've played an above-average schedule of run defenses as well. And so you think about the injuries, you think about the schedule, and somehow the Dolphins are still 3rd in rushing efficiency. So you do have that running dog situation here. You go back to that second half of the Germany game, they had a 44% success rate on runs. They didn't have Devon Achane in that initial matchup. So I think that's step 1. Miami has to be able to run it. Step 2 is keeping Tua clean. You look at what the Chiefs have kind of done defensively, and we talk all the time about how that defense was built. It was built to play with leads. I don't think anybody expected the offense to be so porous. They thought they'd be playing with leads, and so that's why the run defense isn't as good. But you do have, Chris Jones, Amenahue, Karlaftis, Dana. They're solid pressure guys. That foursome alone combined for a 13% pressure rate on pass rush snaps with 40 sacks. Tua's splits are massive. Out of 43 qualifying quarterbacks, Tua's yards per pass attempt dips to 27th. His adjusted accuracy falls off a cliff to 39th when he's pressured. When kept clean, Tua's first in yards per pass attempt, 7th in adjusted accuracy. So Tua quite literally goes from, an elite quarterback when kept clean that you'd probably be willing to make your franchise quarterback for the next decade to unplayable when he's pressured. Now, there's a caveat to pressuring Tua. You want it to come naturally. If you send pressure via the blitz, which Spags loves to do, the Chiefs are 7th highest blitz rate team in the league. Tua is graded out number 1 against the blitz, and a lot of it has to do with scheme, right? They use a bunch of motion, which makes it kind of tip your hand pre-snap as a defense. But Tua's 79% adjusted accuracy against the blitz, 1 turnover-worthy play all season. So natural pressure is the key. You get natural pressure and you play coverage, you got a shot, right? Because Tua and the offense throws with so much anticipation, he's likely going to give you a ball or two.
And that becomes the name of the game. I mean, it's so interesting because you highlight some of the pressure, and we saw that. I mean, Tua typically does well when you're going to bring pressure from the defensive back position. Tua has thrived. Didn't exactly do that against Kansas City, and the Chiefs have a cheat code in their own right where Trent McDuffie has been one of the most disruptive cornerbacks when it comes to generating pressure from that position. So it'll be a fascinating chess match to watch on a variety of fronts to see what Spag can do. We do know about the level of familiarity, and I'm sure that plenty of people are going to fall on the Tua narrative when we talk about inclement weather and how he's performed in temperatures, not just below 40, but interestingly enough, when the mercury dips below 70, a true Southern boy at heart overall.
Most of those games without Mike McDaniel.
Yes. I mean, most of those games did not have his current coaching staff. So like I said, there is noise in all of these numbers, but they're still fun to talk about, more narrative-driven than the terms of the overall impact that they'll have on a game here. But if Miami's going to try and shorten the game, they're going to find success running the football because they want to try and protect a defense that is down a laundry list of players. We know about Jalen Phillips. We know about Bradley Chubb. Andrew Van Ginkel lost for the season as well. Xavier Howard, Jerome Baker, season-ending surgery. Cam Good, a depth player that can generate a little bit of pass rush. The list goes on and on. But Payne, we keep waiting for the light to go on for this Kansas City Chiefs offense. It hasn't done that all season. Now, I know they get a chance to rest and recover. Most of the key contributors were not out there last week in their 13-12 win against the Chargers. But is it as simple as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes being able to figure things out against a beleaguered Dolphins defense that can't do a lot of the things and employ some of the concepts that Vic Fangio anticipated when this roster had 100% health?
That's a good question, and specific to the Chiefs' offense, we knew it wasn't past iterations, right? 2, 3, 4 years ago, but it still lingered around top 5 in efficiency, and so our initial thought process was like the negativity was somewhat unwarranted because we're not taking it for what it is, but comparing it to the past, right? Nobody would say like the 5th best offense in the league is bad unless you're trying to compare it to a historic offense, which the Chiefs were. However, down the stretch, it's been pretty concerning. from week 8 onward, you're looking at a Chiefs offense 21st in EPA per play, and the Chiefs have played a bottom 10 schedule of defenses on the season. And so there's been more merit to it. And it's not just one thing, too, where you can be like, hey, I'm going to go fix this. Hey, Veach, go get us a guy here. Matt Nagy, he's touching the offense, and
no love lost for Bears fans, that's for damn sure.
Certainly fucking it up a little bit. The adjustments at halftime have been poor. Third lowest scoring team in the second half. We know about the drops. The Chiefs lead the league in those. Kelsey seems to be aging like milk, and he's got some other interests where his energy is being exerted, it seems. You can only
global pop sensation Travis Kelsey.
You can only expedite Rashid Rice's growth process, so quickly, and no other receivers have really emerged. And I think something very few are talking about is like the all-world offensive line hasn't played at the same rate we've seen the past 2-3 seasons. I mean, even that 3-man interior of Tooney and Humphrey and Trey Smith, they haven't performed to the elite bar they've set. Still very good, but those three were just elite. And then one of Brett Veach's, I would say, worst decisions was to spend as much as he did on Jawan Taylor, and I understand that wasn't the first option. And the Chiefs are in win now mode, so you kind of have to protect the franchise's best asset. But Taylor is having his worst season as a pro. You see Donovan Smith's ability as a pass protector in fits and spurts. Some really premium games in pass protection, but he didn't quite return to his full 2021 form, and he's been dealing with injuries, and Wanya Morris isn't ready, and so the Chiefs' offensive line has taken a step back as well. The advantage here, though, is the Dolphins are decimated by injury, specifically along the defensive line and at edge. So, there isn't a Jalen Phillips, there isn't a Bradley Chubb, who are both out for the year. Andrew Van Ginkel, the Dolphins' number 1 grade defender, is out for this one. So that's your top 3 edge rushers. And so suddenly that issue, and there it was, suddenly that issue, we're not quite there yet, but on to Sunday's games there, you're seeing the... That is not surprising, that move.
Focus, Payne, focus.
Yeah, you're seeing,
We did have an inkling that move was coming.
Yeah. So where I'm going with this is like the tackle position for the Chiefs has been a bit of a mess. I'm not quite sure the current state of the Dolphins defense can take advantage of that. Xavier Howard is out. I think we've probably been first to market there on what he truly is at this point. Jerome Baker is out. Javon Holland, Deshaun Elliott playing through significant injuries. And so, the Dolphins basically just trotted on down the road to the retirement home there, made sure all of the AARP cards hadn't expired yet, and they signed 36-year-old Bruce Irvin and 35-year-old Justin Houston to pair with soon-to-be 35-year-old Melvin Ingram. And that's what this defensive end group is going to look like for Miami Saturday night. I would fully expect those 3 to be tested by the ground game, see if they can still set an edge. Vic Fangio had to cut against the grain last week, sent the blitz on 44% of Josh Allen's dropbacks. That's almost a 25% increase over his season-long average. So basically, Vic went with this higher variance approach, knowing he wasn't going to be able to match up down to down. And yes, the scoreboard looked nice, right? And 14 of the Bills' 21 points took some fortune with a 90-yard punt return and a deflected pass touchdown that probably, it was an absolute miracle, but also some ineligible men downfield that wasn't called. Buffalo, to my point, though, had 4 drives of 73 yards or more.
Oh, they moved the ball at will. They self-destructed more than the Dolphins stopped them.
Yes, and you think about Miami's defense on the field for nearly 40 minutes and 77 snaps. The league did Miami's defense no favors here. Played Sunday Night Football. Now you get the Saturday game. And so, the numbers are down from an EPA perspective as all of the Chiefs' offensive numbers are. But I don't know if this specific unit with how it currently is going to present a tough task, right? You think about where now with Wilkins on the inside. Yeah, he's the Dolphins' best defender. It's probably going to get negated to a point with guys like, Tooney and Creed in there. So how effective is he if your best guy's being neutralized a little bit and you're not getting a ton of help from the edges? So you're probably going to have to blitz Mahomes. Now, again, like all of the EPA numbers are down for the Chiefs offense, but in general, like Mahomes has not been a guy you want to blitz. And so becomes a little bit of that catch 22. You also look at some of the matchups. Like Miami has improved the back half of the season defending the middle of the field as they got healthier. But with the injuries now, again, it's like, Kelsey and Rice should probably show well and look a little bit fresher off the week off. Miami still bottom 10 in receptions allowed to the tight end position. Why these games are being difficult, and again, going back to like Browns Texans, it's like, yes, when you break that game down and look at the matchups, it leads you to the Browns, and then all of a sudden, you got to think about the most important thing, it's price. And at 3, tough. Same thing with this game. It's like, it's very obvious there's been some very respected money on the Chiefs to this point. Cheap money lines minus 180, lay 3, lay 3.5, lay 4. We're now out to 5 at some of the sharper shops. The short week for Miami versus the Chiefs resting guys. The freezing temps narratives, which again, when the public has their say, are probably going to be factored into the market just because that type of money is coming into the market. The injuries, right? They all slant in favor of the Chiefs.
Yeah, all the factors line up for Kansas City in this particular spot.
It's just getting expensive, right? Like if you're viewing these teams on a season-long Excel sheet, the sharpest of the sharp make Miami a favorite on a neutral. Right? 1 point favorite, 1.5 point favorite. Let's say you loved the Chiefs more than anybody else. Maybe they're a pick. Maybe they're one. Like, I don't know where this goes because inevitably Mostert and Waddle are going to get upgraded, and that probably impacts the screen. But I do know there are some buy orders lingering out there for like 6 minus 20 or better.
And there's a distinct possibility that number surfaces the way we're trending now. Yeah. Although to your point, if Waddle and Mostert do get upgraded, I can't imagine the 5s that are even out there will drift to 5.5, given that what we've seen early from betting trends, the general public more or less split on this game. Always a fascinating matchup. When we look at the betting markets above some of the X's and O's to see where this number settles, and a fun game Saturday night that 12 people may be able to see on a streaming platform. So, Payne, if you're nice, I might let you borrow my password.
Well, you were saying that, but I had a feeling all of South Florida is going to get the game on NBC.
Yes, you guys, all the people in local markets are able to get the game. But for those folks that are struggling to find it, let me be the first to tell you, not on NBC, only on Peacock.
Yeah,
so
just
make sure you take advantage.
DM Todd. He'll give you his UNP.
I love all of our listeners, but I'm not sure that I can send out my username and password to all of our thousands in the 50 to 100,000 range of listeners to be able to log in. I think it might raise some red flags. So no, as generous as I am with my time and energies, I will not be doing that. So folks can take advantage of the free trials.
I'll just put it out there publicly on the old Twitter.
Thanks, so I appreciate that.
You can there, and I'll tweet that out right before kickoff.
You can dox my information when it comes to all the streaming services out there, and you should be following Payne already at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me on X.
Password there, Fuhrman.
There as well.
Your past life is going to catch up to you right before
kickoff. And most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. All right, we wanted to play meteorologist at Arrowhead. Payne, this one may have an even bigger weather impact. The early game on Sunday from Western New York and Archer Park, where the Bills are a double-digit favorite, welcoming in the 7-seed Pittsburgh Steelers. This total has been crushed. Opened as high as 43.5 at some spots. We're now down in that 35.5, 36 range. The side has not moved at all, which is always interesting when you think about it. And you look at some of the weather forecasts. The folks in Buffalo calling for 20 to 25 mile an hour sustained winds, 35-plus mile an hour gusts, scattered snow showers, single-digit wind chills, and it's a rivalry rekindled of sorts. Coach Sean McDermott and Mike Tomlin, teammates at William & Mary back in the day in the early 90s. We look at these two teams, the Bills with a plus 140 point differential and the Steelers minus 20, separated by 160 in that particular department. It would be the second largest upset if the Steelers were able to win this game outright. When we look at the Steelers playing without TJ Watt, a team that's just 1-10 without him since drafting him back in the 2017 season, double-digit underdogs have not fared all so well in the wild card round, going 0-11 straight up, 2-9 ATS. The Bills, however, haven't exactly been juggernauts from an ATS perspective, just going 3-10 against the number the last 13 playoff games. Josh Allen, a woeful 2-6 in that category. Payne, we could sit here and dissect the X's and O's all we want. Bills offense, Steelers defense, the other side of the ball. That's what I'm saying with weather and everything else playing a role. What's the one thing that you're looking for in this handicap?
We're also at 44 minutes here. We've only gotten through 2 GD games here, so we're gonna speed this up a little bit. But the weather's the biggest.
We're gonna put this in the express lane for this game.
Yeah, the weather's the biggest factor, and I think more general talk here on that. Like weather's become a lot more prevalent of a topic, say, the last 12 to 24 months than any point prior, because the betting market takes notice faster than ever. And I think there's two factions, right? Those grabbing the number early, those bitching and saying early week weather totals are dumb, and then waiting until the bottom falls out and cutting against the grain closer to kick when the weather might not be as impactful. And then you actually have the third faction, which is far and away the sharpest of the factions. They do both. And so, right, they get out ahead of the number, knowing where the market will go with weather speculation. And Pinnacle did I believe, my first check have 42.5 and still had, 41.5 minus 16 before like the full-on barrage of under money came in there Sunday night.
Full disclosure, raising my hand, I did not bet under knowing where this total was going to go, so I do not have a good number in my pocket.
So, right, you're just effectively getting out ahead of the market with the weather speculation, and then monitoring and being adaptable. And you either have a great bet if the weather maintains, or you're waiting additionally, right, for the bottom to fall out and creating massive middles around very important key numbers like 37 and 41 in this particular instance, and in other instances, right, like the 44s and the 47s. For this specific game, we did see some buyback already when it dipped as low as 34.5, and that's why, we're kind of at it like this consensus of, call it like 35.5, 30, 36. The weather has changed a little bit from Sunday night, though, right, when all the big better numbers got wiped out. We're looking at, at that time, Sunday night, 28 mile per hour steady winds with gusts of 54. As we record this Thursday morning, 7 a.m.-ish Pacific, like you're looking at, and I think our weather team, even dating back to baseball days and what we do now, I think is close to the best. And we're seeing 18 mile per hour sustained winds with gusts of 39, but the snow appears to be much heavier than initially expected. And you also never know what can happen with a stadium by the lake that doesn't really impede elements very well. And so we talk all the time about lake effect. That doesn't necessarily get picked up on any of the weather radars. You kind of just have to be there, and shit, it can just happen any moment.
Are we going to have someone sober in the parking lot reporting for us? Is that allowed at a Bills home game?
Well, the key is being sober. Because after, I was joking around to Billy, after like 3 Tito's myself, my head starts spinning, and that could be confused for wind. So we're certainly making a sober individual be at the stadium here. Matchup wise, though, the Bills' fortunes continue. This time last week they could potentially miss the playoffs altogether. Now they have the easiest path to the second round, and their new, less efficient offense suddenly becomes vital based upon the aforementioned weather. Right, like in this exact setting, the Bills' offense far more equipped to handle this game than say like a Dayball offense. So fully anticipate the Bills running a little bit more. TJ Watt being out is certainly a massive loss. He's not just a one-trick pony. He's actually graded out the Steelers' best run defender. And we saw a season ago when Watt was out for an extended stretch, the Steelers' defense went from 7th in EPA per play allowed to 31st. Offenses were gaining 100 more yards per game. Pittsburgh's run defense did improve, though, a little bit once Cam Hayward returned, about 5% better in rushing success rate allowed, so he's back there. Minkah Fitzpatrick will be back, which is extremely helpful. He's a solid third-level defender against the run, can shore up the middle for some of those short tight end passes you would expect from the Bills' offense. But surface level, Right. This would be the Bills appearing to have an edge on the ground when you think about quarterback attributes. Having Josh Allen's mobility, especially in the red zone, inside the 10 is huge in a game like this where you're not going to have to potentially settle for field goals. You can use Josh to get some efficient runs there and score touchdowns instead. Mason Rudolph is like a 4-9 guy. He just really hasn't been part of the Steelers' run game. And then you think about that Steelers offense, right? Yes, they want to get the ground game going. And yes, Najee has been more efficient. And yes, the Bills' defense has not been as great against the run, even during some of their late season improvement. But Daquan Jones is back. He's their best run stuffer. And if you look at his splits on and off the field, how much better the Bills' defense is with him on against the run is huge. It appears we have a fair number here at 10, Todd. Anything that opened below that key got bet up. The moment books tried popping a hook on the 10 there and went to 10.5, those got bought. To me, from what I am hearing at this point, right, as we're like discussing this game at 10 and 35.5, all of the interest from pro bettors at this number, at these market prices have been more focused on props. Right, we saw some quarterback unders get hit yesterday. Saw some Josh Allen rushing attempts get hit over yesterday. We saw some, with Najee taking more of the backfield load and the potential game state with a 10-point spread. We've seen some Jaylen Warren under rush attempts get hit yesterday. So it's been very prop focused at kind of the market prices that have been stable for the last 48 hours. The focus has shifted towards props.
Makes a world of sense. Take advantage of all of the tools that are available at your disposal this time of year. We know the prop markets continue to grow during the regular season. They get even more pronounced. Limits tick up during playoff games. So professional bettors out in full force to try and exploit an edge any which way they can find it. Always interesting, as we talked about. You see the total on this thing move a full touchdown, minimal movement on the side. We'll see where the next moves come in as we get a better idea of exactly what the weather will look off for that 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff come Sunday afternoon. Into the afternoon game, though, in the NFC, Payne, and there will not be any weather. By the way, I'm not sure why I didn't put all this together. 3 AFC games to kick things off and then 3 NFC games after. So we're going to have numbers early on in terms of the AFC playoff matchups early on Sunday. I'm curious to see when books actually get those up. Green Bay Packers against the Dallas Cowboys. This was the move you were referencing. It would have been 7.5 and a total of 50.5 before the show started. We've seen some of the sharpest shops now trend down, the hook disappearing from the market with the Cowboys a full touchdown favorite. No real movement on the total. And when we look at some of the highlights,
originated out west, huh? Not offshore. By the way,
yeah, that's the way. That's definitely the way it does look.
Interesting.
With the way things have gone there. First wild card matchup ever between the two outright passing touchdown leaders, Dak Prescott on one side, Jordan Love on the other. Mike McCarthy becomes the third head coach to coach a playoff game versus a team he previously won a Super Bowl, NFL, AFL title with, Mike Holmgren being the other, and the always popular Weeb Eubank, who I didn't even know when he coached, but it was back in the 1950s, so this can be an educational experience as well. The Cowboys, 12 straight playoff appearances without a conference championship game is the longest in NFL history, seeking to get to their first conference championship game since 1995. They've been white hot at home. 16 straight home game victories, the longest such streak for the Cowboys, going all the way back to the late 70s, early 80s. We know how dominant they've been in that department as well. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, and for the Packers, they are the youngest playoff team since the 1974 Bills, and they come in riding the wave. 6 of 8 games victorious since starting the season, 3-6, largely led by Jordan Love, an 18-1 touchdown interception ratio during that span. When we look at some of the playoff trends, Dak just 1-5 ATS in 6 playoff starts, 0-3 against the number in the home playoff games. The Cowboys, though, they've been very good as a home team over the last 10 games, covering 8 out of 10 in that favorite role. This Packers offense, Payne, they've really come of age. Jordan Love asserting himself as the franchise quarterback for Green Bay. He's done it with a largely inexperienced receiving core that they can grow up with. Jaden Reed become the healthiest, I guess, by default option, as Christian Watson hasn't been out there much. Romeo Doubs catches a couple of touchdowns, ends up in the hospital, should be back for this game. Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton, the list goes on and on. Aaron Jones, though, starting to show how valuable he is as a runner and receiver. Go figure. It took an A.J. Dillon injury for the Packers to realize they had a dynamic playmaker that if you get him on the field and you get him touches, good things happen. Well, when you look at this Green Bay offense against the Cowboys defense, how do you think Dallas will fare against a young and inexperienced offense that's playing with a world of confidence?
I think that's the big question, and then there's some narrative to it, and it's extremely difficult to put a numerical value on that, but it's going to be a very tough environment for the youngest team in football. So that does add a layer of variance. It's difficult to project for the Packers offense, but matchup-wise, you wouldn't think Green Bay will be totally overmatched with how they're trending and the way Dallas played down the stretch. I mean, the Cowboys defense, a bit of a mirage, right? Living on turnovers. Now, yes, pressure bust pipes, and since Dan Quinn arrived, the pressure rates have been extremely high, top of the league, and it's led to, a league high rate of turnovers created. But specifically this season, you go back post-bye, you're looking at a defense that just has not been good down to down. 48% of passes, 44% of runs have graded successful against the Cowboys. That's 21st and 30th. The Cowboys have played a bottom 10 schedule of offenses this season as well. And the reason the Cowboys defense does survive, as we mentioned, right? Pressure. Number one in pass rush win rate. But part of our reasoning for buying the Packers this offseason and going over 7.5 wins was their offensive line. Now, it was injured early, and it's kind of formed into shape. This shocked me as you start to dig a little bit more. I noticed it last week. I watched it kind of unfold in the field. Like, man, this is really interesting. And Packers, number 2 in pass block win rate. Now, in that environment, I'm sure Love is going to see some pressure. But I just, on paper, you would think it gets neutralized to a degree. We've also talked multiple weeks in a row now about Jordan Love's growth. His confidence is just skyrocketed since Thanksgiving. Since that time, week 12, number 2 among 46 quarterbacks with at least 50 dropbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Now, it's only a 7-game sample, but you can actually see the material change, right? It's not just...
I think... Going back to Thanksgiving, I think that's when you sent me the text because we had the teaser exposure on the Lions. You go, where the hell has this Jordan Love been all season for our win total? Yeah. At least he got us to the finish line.
Yep. And so if you notice the change in his game, he's getting rid of the ball quicker. So it's time to throw his sped up. He's willing to take the shorter, uncontested throws. Before, everything was a deep shot. If you remember, as we were kind of like looking at the first, 6-7 weeks, like, man, the down-to-down stuff is horrific, but the EPA looks good because they're hitting a bunch of explosives, which he was hunting. The way he navigates the pocket's a little bit different. He's going through all of the progressions. The way he's reading his progressions are different. He's not always going deep to short anymore. He's going short to intermediate to deep, right? So that part of his game has grown so much. I also mentioned, the Cowboys ranking 30th in rushing success rate allowed since their bye. Now, the big fella inside, Jonathan Hankins, returned to practice ahead of week 18. So he's been getting limited practices in since, has not had a full yet. Let's keep an eye on that today because LaFleur is going to want to get the ground game fired up, keep the Cowboys pass rushers honest, slow this game down to a halt with a healthy Aaron Jones, to your point at the top, Todd. By nature, Green Bay is extremely slow in the first half. That's what LaFleur wants. They're 28th in first half pace. So, again, the situation could be difficult for a young team, but on paper, right, the Packers' run game with a healthy Aaron Jones, slow the pace down, limit the number of possessions for the Cowboys' offense, the Packers' ability to pass protect, Love showing, more willingness to take the quick pass and the check down. Stephon Gilmore battling through a shoulder injury that could, seemingly pop out at any time would then leave the Cowboys without their top 2 cover corners coming into the year. And Jordan Love has also been far better against man coverage, and the Cowboys use man at the 4th highest rate. So it kind of leads me to believe this side of the ball will be pretty competitive, Todd.
When we look on the other side of the ball, if you look at Green Bay's full sample size the entire season, from a defensive efficiency standpoint, it's nothing to write home about with by any stretch of the imagination. We know that Joe Barry's unit has typically struggled against the run. They've allowed the 5th most rushing yards per game. 4 teams have gone for over 200 yards against the Packers, but they've trended up recently. I mean, you look at how they've performed 4 straight games with under 100 rushing yards allowed. Week 14, they were 31st against opponent rushing attacks, 28th against opponent yards per carry. Week 15 through 18, a limited sample size, but significantly better in both of those departments. You've seen the scoring defense improve as a result, and it's not coincidental, Payne, that they started to get healthier in the secondary. They get some key cogs back on the defense, and the results have been out there, and they've passed with flying colors as they trend towards this game. But this is a much different animal. When we look at the Cowboys and how prolific they've been offensively, I mean, they led the NFL in scoring offense this season for the second time in the past 3 seasons. I mean, CeeDee Lamb has been an absolute cheat code in the passing game. They're getting Brandon Cooks more involved. The offensive line has showed slightly improved health overall. We're going to want to pay attention to, Tyron Smith or Tyler Smith. But if you believe what Stephen Jones told us, he should be out there in a full capacity. The disappointing aspect of the Dallas offense has been their inability to consistently sustain a ground game. But against Green Bay, what path do the Cowboys have to try and get on track and be able to maintain some of that high-flying offense we've seen in fits and spurts? But the last data point we saw at home was an offense that looked to be pedestrian and mundane in slipping by to the Detroit Lions.
Well, maybe you do get a little bit more efficiency with the Cowboys' ground game because the offensive line should be a little bit healthier, and that's where Green Bay's been susceptible for multiple years in a row under this style of defense. Now, to me, Joe Barry isn't very good, but he hasn't had the full arsenal either, and kudos to him for throwing a curveball at the Bears and Justin Fields last week, going with more man coverage looks on third down, and kind of being creative in some of the stunts, which led to Fields being confused and holding on to the ball forever. I mean, you look at how long Justin Fields held on to the ball last week. It was ridiculous. It led to a 63% pressure rate and 5 sacks. So I think with improved health, it's impossible for the Packers to not get better defensively. You have your elite cover corner and Jay Alexander back. He just kind of would allow you to do so many different things. Going man coverage on third down against the Bears last week wouldn't have been a thing without Jair Alexander being able to match up on DJ there. Getting Darnell Savage back at safety, who's only replacement level, but the drop-off behind him is so massive it makes him valuable. Having your leader in Green Dot back in the middle with Devondre Campbell won't be talked about enough this week, but he returned in Week 18, and he'll be out there again this week. And we know the talent up front is enormous, right? You just think about Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark, Wyatt, and Van Ness. Those 5 dudes have an average draft position of 23rd overall. So there is a ton of talent up front, and that's probably why Joe Barry's going to be out of a job, because he hasn't been able to do much with that talent. But this does feel
give Vrabel LaFleur, switch the roles.
Yeah.
See if he wants to be a DC.
That would actually be very interesting. That'd be fun, actually. I do feel like in saying all of that, Dallas is going to have success here on offense. You look at this 3-game win streak for Green Bay. The defense has only been above average in EPA per play allowed, 12th. Average in down-to-down success rate. And you're facing a Dallas offense in a dome with an offensive line that, again, is trending healthier. Green Bay has taken a massive step up in class. This isn't Tommy DeVito. It's not Baker Mayfield dealing with rib and ankle injuries. It's not a rookie in Bryce Young or a rookie in Jaron Hall and Nick Mullins. It's not Justin Fields, right? This is a legitimate Cowboys offense that has edges in many areas. And
I can't believe you threw the Baker Mayfield slander in there. Guy had a perfect passer rating against this Green Bay defense. Sliced and diced him.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's doing that to you, and listen, I'm going to send me down a diatribe here. I think people look at Baker Mayfield as like the number 1 overall pick. We should get past that. He's a guy who is undersized, not overly athletic, doesn't have the strongest arm, and he's still out here starting in a playoff game. And he's kind of overcome the odds throughout the course of time of his career. So kudos to him. But yes, he shredded this defense. It's much different now, right? A lot of those guys are healthier. But the other interesting thing here is, yes, Joe Barry kind of threw some curveballs last week with man, but the Packers still are primarily a zone coverage team. I do wonder if he allows those guys to play a little bit more man. I know there's some question marks about the corner opposite Jair, but I would have Jair travel with Lamb, even though I know Lamb moves around a lot. If the Packers do employ their high rates of zone, since week 8, Dak is absolutely torched zone. I mean, you're talking top 3 in total EPA to completion rate over expectation, you name it. He is just absolutely torch zone coverage. So I think the real question here is like, and it becomes narrative-y, if you're backing the Cowboys because you think they'll shred the Packers defense, and you're thinking the environment may be too tough for a young team, are you more comfortable laying 4 in the first half or 7 full? Because, again, kind of narrative, but I could see a situation where, like, the Cowboys feel like they're cruising, but they're only up like 7, and it's late third quarter, and suddenly you're like, oh boy, Mike McCarthy's backside starts to pucker a little bit here.
I mean, this is a team that you've called out being the ultimate front runners, that when things are tight late in games, it's not when you get the Cowboys at their absolute best looking to extend leads late in games. So if the Cowboys aren't up by double digits at the half, I'm not sure it's the kind of game where you're sitting in a tie ball game or you're up by a field goal going into the fourth quarter and it's Dallas outscoring a Green Bay team that starts to feel comfortable in hostile territory, with a plus 14 point advantage to get comfortably outside the number.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be interesting to watch unfold. We know Jerry Jones, even though he's commended Mike McCarthy multiple times throughout the course of the season, certainly hasn't given him the vote of confidence if he were to throw up on himself here and somehow lose in the first round, that he'd still be the coach next year.
Oh, Mike loses this game, I think he can lose his job.
Yeah, I kind of get that vibe too.
I wouldn't be shocked at all if that was the case, and that's how things transpired. But that may be a little bit hot takey and won't necessarily have a bearing on how things go as McCarthy renews acquaintances with the Green Bay Packers. Into the Sunday night game, Payne, the game between the Rams and the Lions. A high level of familiarity between these coaches and the respective quarterbacks on some level. When we look at the Lions, they're now down to a field goal favorite. Total in the game, 51.5. We did have a prominent shop open this game as high as 4.5. You've seen one-way traffic coming in on the road team. This will be the Lions' first home playoff game since the 1993 wildcard game against the Green Bay Packers, taking place at the Pontiac Silverdome, a game the Lions lost 28-24 on a Brett Favre 40-yard touchdown pass to Sterling Sharp in the final minute. The Lions have the longest playoff losing streak all time now at 9 games. Haven't won a playoff game since 1991. It's the longest active drought in the National Football League. Matthew Stafford versus Jared Goff becomes the first quarterback matchup in postseason history between quarterbacks both facing their former teams. First time quarterbacks faces his former team in the playoffs since Peyton Manning lost to the Colts back in the 2014 divisional round. And when we look at this Rams team, Payne, oh, what a difference it makes. Looking at a squad that was 3-6, staring down the barrel of a 3-7 start to the campaign, being the team that a lot of us thought they would be, rebuilding, trying to figure out an identity. You end up beating the Seahawks. They use that game to spark an improbable run to the playoffs, and now suddenly it's an offense that has the big play potential with Matthew Stafford. You look at what they're doing when they have Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua in the fold. 28.5 points per game, nearly 400 yards per game, and Stafford with an 18-3 touchdown interception ratio. The numbers are outstanding there. In steps a Lions stop unit that did get some key cogs back last week in C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Aleem McNeil, but we know when we look at the Lions, the defense isn't exactly how they go about doing business, and Aaron Glenn will have his hands full trying to slow down this Rams offense that's got an identity now.
Aaron Glenn, he's got his hands full all week. He's taking a bunch of interviews.
Busy man. It would be the most Commanders thing ever to bring in Aaron Glenn with a new quarterback. Let me tell you that.
Okay, let me ask you this. What do you make of the Rams? I know we are certainly higher on them than our anticipation of them coming into the season, right? Full disclosure, we went under 7.5, caused quite the market stir. That closed, 6.5, but shit, even with like juice, it was closer to 6 than it was 6.5. And
yeah, that was a game. That was a win total we gave out way back in the spring
May.
on this show.
Yeah. And so now you fast forward and you think about Matthew Stafford in like a one-game setting has the potential to beat anybody, right? I mean, he can just get hot. He's that kind of quarterback. You start to go through this, though, and it's like they have caught every break known to mankind. Matthew Stafford, who's basically being held together by bubble gum and rubber bands, managed to stay healthy the entire season. Offensive line exceeded expectation. Defense, which we thought would be one of the league's 5 worst, has exceeded expectation, playing, below average in totality, but pretty good in some other areas. Puka Nacua, just some random 5th-round draft pick, sets every fucking record known to mankind. Kyron Williams, who this staff has seen for multiple years, and he runs 4.6. He's not a game breaker. Somehow is the most valuable piece to this entire offense. Everything that could potentially go right for the Rams has gone right, and they have beat how many playoff teams?
The Browns.
That's it. And it was in Flacco's first game without Denzel Ward, in the first game where Myles Garrett's battling the shoulder injury, and the game's 20-19 with under 5 minutes to go in their own building. Their best data point is in a loss to Baltimore. The vast majority of a lot of this offensive success is against dregs like Arizona and what Seattle's defense has become under Clint Hurt, and Washington, and struggling to beat the Giants. I think that's interesting because everyone in the world is seemingly on the Rams this week, and I understand at plus 3.5, it's certainly a different conversation, and I absolutely believe the Rams are going to have offensive success here. But you mentioned Kyron Williams and what he means for the Rams offense. You do have a Lions defense. That's their strength. Number one.
Yep.
In
Great
defensive rush efficiency. They do get pressure, and Stafford is graded out QB 21 versus pressure. You do start to get some of those pieces back healthy on the Lions defense up front with Aleem McNeil, Gardner Johnson in the back. I just don't know what to make of the Rams because it feels like the narrative on them has just shifted so quickly. And yes, I don't really believe in the Lions defense. I haven't. And so that's why we were chuckling about Aaron Glenn getting interview opportunities, especially to replace other defensive coordinators like, whoever's well, I mean, that's not really a downgrade. I don't really value Ron Rivera, but the Titans, for instance, like you're firing Vrabel to then, interview Aaron Glenn. That would seem like a waste of time. But the goal here, I think, is, can the Lions get a stop or two in a crucial moment by getting pressure or putting Stafford behind the down and distance because the run defense has been so good. And that really, to me, is the synopsis of this. Does Aaron Glenn throw a curveball? We saw him try to throw one on Thanksgiving Day on a short week where he's primarily his own team because he doesn't have the horses back there, and he tries to go man against the Packers, and the Packers just freaking torch him. Does he sprinkle a little more man in here? I do think the bye week certainly rested some of these guys like Matthew Stafford, like Kyron Williams, who had just come back from his injury and then just started getting, a workload and a half. And we know...
Give the dude 30 touches a game. You'd be just fine out there.
Yeah, and supposedly chomping at the bit for more. Didn't want to sit out practice at all last week because he was missing the game. Wanted to stay in form. Cooper Kupp, obviously, is there. He's returned from injury, but he was battling some things, and so that week off helps. And then you have Puka Nacua, who, didn't play a full game last week, so these guys should be fully rested. But the Rams team is so hard for me, but clearly their offense if they come out here and score early, certainly provides an edge and forces the Lions potentially to play a little bit more left-handed on offense.
I do think when you mention the Lions, I mean, this is a game where they have to come out and they have to keep that crowd that's going to be foaming at the mouth in prime time on Sunday for the first home playoff game in eternity. Give them something to cheer about early on in the game, because the last thing you want is that buzz to start. They see a familiar face in Matthew Stafford shredding that defense, and it's Jared Goff playing from behind. But you mentioned the Rams being an enigma, and when you look at this team defensively, Rams safety Jordan Fuller, day-to-day with an ankle injury, could potentially be a big loss. We know what Aaron Donald means in terms of generating natural pressure on the interior, but he's been aided with the emergence of a couple of young players in Kobe Turner and Bryson Young that have at least given them a pass rush when teams focus all of their attentions there. But the secondary for the Rams leaves a lot to be desired. Akilo Witherspoon has trended poorly. At Quentin Lake, going to be asked to do an awful lot in the slot, trying to slow down Amon-Ra St. Brown. So when you look at this Lions offense, Payne, we know they have a two-headed monster in the backfield. Jahmyr Gibbs gives them a little bit more burst. We know St. Brown is a home run waiting to happen. Jamison Williams trending up, so that's a deep threat that they should look to try and hunt the deep ball once or twice, knowing that the Rams are prone to giving up 20-plus yard touchdown passes. But the Lions offense against the Rams defense, what are you looking for to unfold here?
Well, I'm surprised you haven't gotten to all the narrative stuff here, because, we got Jared Goff, Sean McVay. We got that little battle. And I think it's an interesting conversation, and I don't really know how to value it. I think that is maybe the intrigue here, is you're going to have every single person talk about this from the moment it became a matchup until this game kicks off on Sunday night. Goff, McVay versus Goff. Clearly nobody on earth knows Goff better than McVay. And there's some truth to that, but I don't know how you put a numerical value on it. At minimum, McVay knows every throw. Goff loves to make every throw. He can't or doesn't have full confidence making, right? His strengths, his weaknesses, how he thinks about the game, how his mind and eyes typically go through progressions. In saying that, though, it's 2024. Right, these are multi-billion-dollar organizations. They have coaching, scouting, and analytical staffs that exceed 100 people. And I know they're not always the greatest, but Jared Goff's played 8 seasons now. His strengths and deficiencies are pretty evident at this point. Two idiots that own and operate a company called Bet the Board that does podcasts discussing NFL games have been talking about that for as long as Goff's been in this league. So I'm not sure we're trading state secrets here. And that seems to be a lot of the reasoning behind the folks who bet the Rams early in the week. That's all they can seem to talk about. Specific to this matchup and thinking about the Lions being forced to play left-handed, their goal is not, right? You think about Dan Campbell's personality and the makeup of Detroit, and it shouldn't surprise anybody that the Lions are 25th in pass rate over expectation. So even though Ben Johnson's kind of breathed life into the Lions' throw game, it's very much an offense that's reliant on the most expensive offensive line in the NFL to kind of bully and create space for Montgomery and Gibbs. And the Lions do that very well. They're 4th in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. The Rams defense, 20th stopping the run. Some of it's scheme related. A lot of 3-down fronts with 2 edge rushers standing up. The Rams rely more on kind of getting to the spot quicker than you. So if you can get your hands on them, then you can move them a little bit. The rookie third rounder there, Kobe Turner, has been, I think, the unsung hero of the Rams defense, playing alongside Aaron Donald. But it's a very undersized Rams front. You look at the 3 down linemen, they average about 279 pounds each. But I think what's interesting is it's not just about the run game, but what the Lions can do off of it. If the Rams can't stop the run, it's likely going to force Raheem Morris to send more help into the box. And then the Rams can't live in their too high shell they love so much, which has given Goff all sorts of problems. Big problems. You've seen defenses go out of their way to play the too high shell against Goff. Ben Johnson, I think, also needs to up his rate of throws that Jared Goff makes with play action. If you look on the season, Goff throws a play action about 26% of snaps. It's not a low rate, It's basically middling, but he's just far more efficient when throwing with play action. So I would think you want to crank this up near like 40% for a game like this. But not only is it helpful to the Lions pass game, which is certainly more efficient when they throw with play action, but the Rams defense, man, massive splits, extremely sensitive to play action. If you just line up and throw at the Rams, this is going to shock some people. Top 5 in EPA per pass allowed. When you implement play action ahead of the throw, bottom 5. And so that's important here. I do think the Sam Laporta LCL, PCL injury is significant in that what he means to this offense in this specific matchup. And I kind of think Dan Campbell's playing a little bit of a charade here. I don't think Laporta is going to play. But if you say he's trending well and he's got a chance, suddenly you don't look like as large of an idiot for playing your starters last week. So I think that's what's going on here a little bit. I don't think he's going to play. But I think when you look at Laporta for this game, this matchup, him being out, one thing we do is a really good job of cutting against the grain and not making everything so general, because you'll hear people say like, oh, this player's worth this amount of points. This player's worth this amount of points. And so, like, let's say your belief is Sam Laporta is worth half a point. In this specific matchup against the Rams defense, that's bottom 5 in both yards per target and touchdown rate allowed to the tight end position. To me, Laporta is worth more than whatever you would value him at traditionally. You know, like it's far different, you know, playing a 49ers defense with Fred Warner than it is this Rams defense. So Laporta to me is a very sizable loss here. Now there was some speculation that the backup Brock Wright, who has also been missing some time, might be available. We'll have to check that injury report, but it would be quite a precipitous drop there if Laporta is out. So suddenly a matchup advantage in a security blanket that Goff probably is not having here.
Yep, so I'm like the rest of the listeners going to have to go back and listen to that entire portion of you breaking down one side of the ball against the other.
It was good. It was good.
Hey,
I ended with the Laporta injury, and also as we're looking at this now, it appears the Texans taking another touch of money there.
If people knew what I had to deal with sometimes recording these shows, they'd give me a medal. I know you tell me how difficult it is for me. We're going to teach you what the mute button is and get one of those giant easy buttons to put on your desk.
Well,
but
when you talk, I put you on mute so I can fumble around here and type, and you don't have to hear it. I put the mic on mute so our listeners don't have to hear it, and then I just started randomly talking. Thankfully, I turned mute off on the mic, so the listeners heard.
No, that's what I was going to say. It's more important the listeners here than me. I mean, let's be honest here. They need to hear that eloquent breakdown. So, fascinating game for a variety of reasons when you look at the chess match that'll take place between two teams that have a path and, you know, very difficult offenses to defend should they get through this matchup and move on to the divisional round next weekend. Last but certainly not least, Monday Night Football, paying two teams that kind of come in at opposite ends of the spectrum. Tampa had to get hot to win the division and repeat as NFC South champions. Philadelphia, I'm not even sure limping into the playoffs would be a strong enough word to use to describe what we've seen from Philadelphia down the stretch. I know Eagles fans said, oh, there was nothing to worry about. We can come back in games. We have that gear in us. Well, you know what? When you constantly play from behind, it's usually a sign that the team ain't that great, and we're seeing that rear its ugly head for Philly as they'll become the sixth team in league history to make the playoffs after losing 5 of their final 6 regular season games. None of the previous 5 teams that accomplished that won multiple playoff games. This stretch for Philadelphia included 3 losses against non-playoff teams, including a loss at home against the Arizona Cardinals week 17, and then a no-show of sorts week 18 against the New York Giants, where the Eagles said they wanted to try and build confidence and momentum going into the playoffs. Meanwhile, this is a Bucs team that nobody expected to do much. They were long shots to win the division coming into the year at price tags of 8-1 or better. You look at how this game played out back in week 3. These teams nowhere near the same teams that they are now. The Eagles won that game 25-11 and used a dominant time of possession edge, holding the ball for nearly 39 minutes that Monday Night Football game to put together long drives and play keep away. Payne, when we look at a game like this, I mean, we can go through X's and O's. We can go through season-long data points and look at the way these teams are trending, if you're trying to identify one side of the ball that's going to dictate who gets the win, the cover, and maybe how the total goes, is it the Eagles offense against this Tampa defense that's getting healthy at the right time of year? Or is it an Eagles defense that's trending poorly but gets Baker Mayfield banged up and limited in terms of what his capabilities may be, given everything that he had to endure last week in the regular season finale against the Carolina Panthers?
Yeah, both. I mean, I think that's what makes this handicap so interesting. And, you know, to me, this is very much a price game and an injury game than it is necessarily matchups. And that's what's difficult about this. And it's why we've had some differing opinions. Again, if you were logged into your sportsbook account before these ever opened, 3 was the number on Tampa. There was a buy plus 3. And then when the market opened, you know, you had numbers like 1.5, 2. We even had 2.5, you know, as we were looking, even Monday. And we've starting to see this leak out to Eagles 3. If you said both of these teams are going to play their A-plus game, okay?
I'm laying 3 and not looking back.
Right? The peak of the Eagles is far greater than the Buccaneers. And it's not close. And we don't really think the Buccaneers are a good football team as much as we try to like assist them, right? You're sitting at a middling team, right? They're somewhere 15th, 16th in our power ratings. The problem is, and go back, if you're a longtime listener, to anything we've said about the Eagles this season, the first point of contention we had was they got very lucky week 9 beating Dallas. Go into their bye week. Very lucky coming out of the bye week and beating Kansas City. They were dominated in that first half. Very lucky beating Buffalo in overtime. They were dominated in that first half. I believe the number off the top of my head was like Buffalo and Kansas City had outgained the Eagles like 595 yards to like 250. It was obliteration, right? San Francisco crushed them. Dallas crushed them in the rematch. Lost a heartbreaker to a bad Seattle team. They are downtrending so hard that you wonder if the market's fully caught up. You would say in your mind, this is the lowest power rating, and it is, that we've had on the Eagles since the first year change make where Sirianni gave up play calling to Steichen, right? Like right at that point is when they started to like go on this massive ascension in year 1. And so like that specific mark is the lowest we had the Eagles, and this is kind of the second lowest. The problem is all of these injuries are starting to mount, right? And you can say Hurts is 100% fine. My understanding is going to play with a little bit of a splint on his throwing finger, his middle finger. I do believe A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are going to be out there. I don't think they are going to be anywhere near their full capability. You mentioned Baker Mayfield. He is dealing with a rib and an ankle injury. It's just very difficult when this game comes to price because you could certainly make the case of groups wanting to buy low on the Eagles, and then you could just make the case that, hey, one of these teams has been fighting and likes each other and has not quit. And there's some just weird stuff going on in that Eagles locker room. And it would be very apparent that the brains have left town. And both Steichen and Gannon at this point. And the idea that you would ever get rid of a guy like Sean Desai, and I am not saying he's the bee's knees by any stretch, but Matt Patricia is fully incompetent. And so sticking with him this week seems like a very bad idea.
Not good, Bob.
Yeah.
Not good.
Like we called for the defensive regression from the Eagles, and it started really with the Super Bowl, having told everyone last year like they didn't play anybody. It was like the easiest schedule of offenses, and when they played like the 2 or 3 good offenses on the schedule that got absolutely torched. And so then you fast forwarded to this season and you lost defensive players and you downgraded in defensive coordinator. And like, I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but I mean, you got Tommy DeVito coming in and cold off the pine going on drives last week. So that's my, like, I wanted to be on the Buccaneers. The price just was a touch short. And then you talk to everybody and you're looking at like the revisited numbers and then like, I don't even get to 3. So there's been a full blown battle here on this game from that perspective, with just 2 factions of one saying, hey, current market, I think the Eagles are dead and buried. 3's too much. The other faction saying, if we're looking at season-long metrics and we value more data points, and if we get both teams playing their whatever their A game is at this point, and you would expect that because it's a playoff game, then you're getting a nice buy low opportunity on the Eagles. That's kind of how this game plays out. In terms of like a matchup advantage, I think anytime you can exploit the middle of the field for the Eagles, right? Reed looks like he's probably a long shot to play. If he does with that groin injury, he's going to be a shell of himself. They haven't figured out the linebacker position, right? They just kind of took a flyer on Shaq Leonard. He hasn't been that dude. So, using the tight ends, going with some play action, and, maybe it's a guy like Cade Otton, who potentially has a nice little matchup advantage there, or it's Chris Godwin running over the middle. And I'll just be candid. I'm starting to look at the market here.
And some of your inclinations are coming to fruition?
Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, I know as we trend away from this game towards the best bet portion of the program, I'll remind our listeners to follow you on social media, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. They can follow me there in the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. I mean, one game was your initial inclination, was the first thing you asked me about on Monday. So I'm
and the other one's taking money against.
I'm on the same page for both. We know that it is a boom or bust potential for, the first one when we look at, the way that this thing can go haywire. So I'll defer to your executive judgment in terms of the way we look at it, and it gets my stamp of approval either way.
Let me just check the weather one.
Always great for podcasting content and just further proof to our listeners that are with us.
We're going to be on both, but we were going to go in one direction specifically for this podcast, and then it's changed course here as I talk about this, and I got a text.
No, for sure. And it's more busting balls as much as anything else, that it just goes to show that we don't edit these things. You guys get a look behind the curtain in terms of what happens with a couple professional bettors that are watching the markets move in real time, and us to pass off the most actionable information for all you guys and girls to try and reap the benefits of what has been a very profitable run of late, despite a sluggish start to the NFL campaign.
Yes. And as it goes, give us a long enough stretch and a long enough sample size, and we will.
That's the name of the game. We've been in this racket since 2014 and turned a profit every year since. Tack those win totals on and everything else, and suddenly we're in the black, baby, just where we knew we'd be.
Yes, let's go back to our roots here with right where we finished up the podcast. Eagles, Buccaneers. Come on, Matt Patricia, you loaf. Just show up here a little bit.
Just one time? Just one time for the good guys?
Just be fucking average. And this game is going under in the first half. Okay. First half under, 21.5. Eagles, Bucks. I just get the vibe the injuries are going to be too much here. The other thing that makes this also interesting is if you're looking at the Buccaneers' season-long defensive metrics, they're probably not going to be as good as you would have thought for Todd Bowles, right? On the season, finished 14th. There was a 4-game sector in there where they were just like decimated. The entire secondary's missing. Key Cogs are missing. Vita Vee's missing. All those guys look much healthier. Now, we'll have to check the Carlton Davis concussion thing, but we kind of know how those have been trending when the games are most important. This is also...
Concussions don't matter when the games mean something. That's the bottom line here.
Let's just be PC. There's an extra day here for him to get ready, which probably is going to be the deciding factor.
It's a very good point there.
So you know, and you look at that first matchup earlier in the season, back in week 3, the Eagles were able to get their ground game going. Their key cog, their 3 key weapons, weren't all dealing with injuries. Game went to the half 13-3. Now the Eagles defense was certainly playing better then, but again, like in a must-win situation last week, yes, you know, that was the Panthers' Super Bowl, trying to effectively end the Buccaneers season and, you know, prevent them from winning the division. But like it wasn't.
Panthers secondary is damn good too. But yeah,
it is damn good, and that is the difference. But it's just like I'm not seeing it from Tampa's offense here, especially if Baker Mayfield is not 100%, and that's my understanding on this one a little bit. You know they're going to burn some snaps running the ball inefficiently. So yeah, back to the well. Eagles Buccaneers first half under 21.5.
Look at that. See, adjusting on the fly, pivoting, making moves. I do too. Maybe we may get a better number.
And I'm talking with the mic on mute now. Yes, you may get a better number as the opposing team is taking a little bit of money. I also, again, as I went through my notes and started talking about it out loud, that first matchup, you know, was the down-to-down success wasn't necessarily there. It was all explosives. And you would hope that there would be some adjustments made to maybe prevent some of those. And you know there's probably not going to be a complimentary ground game as well. And I also hate when, you know, defense gets called out. And, you know, not saying they won't have success. That thing probably flies over. But yes.
A lot of interesting elements. And look, somehow with 6 games, we've covered 90-plus minutes.
Yes.
Job well done for you over there
Yes.
On 3 hours of sleep. So to all of our loyal listeners, look, we've given you everything that we have at our disposal to handicap games where, quite frankly, there have been battles on a lot of these sides and totals. Why would that change in the playoffs when it has been that exact same way throughout the course of the regular season? When you look at these numbers, it's all about getting the best of it and trying to take advantage. Things change by the time the markets are released on Sunday versus when we record on Thursday, and want to give you the most widely available with the best information that we have at our disposal. Anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we bid them a fond farewell? Reconvene next week for 4 pivotal divisional games?
Yeah, 4 games. Thank God. Not 6.
For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your wild card weekend investments, and with a first half under ticket for Monday Night Football between the Bucs and Eagles in hand, we will see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.